Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
Thanks very much, Jim.
People ask me, where is Lions Bay? I said it's a pretty little place halfway between Squamish and Vancouver, isn't it?
Well, that's pretty
roughly
close. That's pretty. You certainly described it right. I'm looking out now at Bowen Island and Gambier Island. It's just fantastic.
And I guess, Rafe, that's a daily reminder to you just how important the environment is to all of us.
Oh, no question about that. And when the thought of an LNG plant going into Squamish, not very far away, and tankers endangering this coast, it's a daily reminder just to look out there no matter what the weather is.
A few days from now, Canada may have a new government or may not. One of the things that you warn about is editorial bias in our newspapers. They have a hidden agenda for supporting certain parties. Maybe you could explain that.
Well, there's no question about that. Very quickly, Post Media, which for our purposes owns the Vancouver Sun, the Vancouver Province, and the National Post, they have a deal with a company called ResourceWorks, which is an out-and-out shill for wood fiber LNG and for the LNG in general. Moreover, National Post has publicly declared that they are in favor of whatever the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers wants to do with the respect of producing and transporting fossil fuels. Now, you're entitled to your opinion, Jim, and so am I. But the fact remains that this is not an opinion, they are on side financially. And the province with ResourceWorks indeed is right in bed with them and all kinds of inner deals and so on and so forth. And so you now got a situation where the people who are supposed to be reporting to you fairly and squarely about what's going on are in fact on one side of one of the biggest issues in Canada. Now, these papers, I don't know about the National Post, I haven't seen that, but the two Vancouver papers today came out in favor of the Prime Minister, Mr. Harper, for quote-unquote economic reasons. Well now, folks, I wonder why that happened. Could it possibly be because one of the big economic movements in Canada right now, despite what we've always said, is fossil fuels, LNG, and so on, and Post Media are financially involved in that industry. So now they've got the cheek to come out and say, we support this. Now, the problem here, Jim, is, for the beginning of time, I suppose, newspapers have always had a problem with advertisers and not offending them, just like radio stations and so on. But they have always done a pretty good job of putting that aside and giving fair reporting and so on. Here, the Post Media are, as I say, firmly on one side of a big issue and now dare to report as if they were doing so impartially to us, the public. It's an absolute disgrace.
Rafe, I do a lot of financial stories on my beat, and the people I talk to always tell me, look, I have shares in that company. I sit on the board of directors, but I'm telling you about this because I believe that your listeners would be interested in this as a business deal, but I'm disclosing this. Shouldn't the newspapers disclose their interests?
Of course they should. And they're not doing it at all. As a matter of fact, they've got a new guy, what the hell's his name? Stafford, who runs sort of a pseudo journalistic TV situation where he comes on and poses as an independent sort of arbiter, what's the word I'm reading? Debater of the issues. And he's on there, and he is right on side. There's no question about that. He's in the thick of it. And the thing about him is he makes no bones about it. At least he admits that he's doing it. But he says, well, that makes it all right. I can still be a journalist if I admit that I'm not one. But in any event, that's what's going. And I think you've made a good point, Jim. I don't think, well, I'd argue, because I think it's disgraceful anyway, but I don't think my argument would be very strong if the Sun and the Province and the National Post posted clearly for all to see. Well, look, folks, when we talk about industry in Canada, you should know that we are financially and deeply involved in the LNG, fossil fuel, etc. industry. We're financially involved, so we really can't give you a fair, independent opinion.
Right now, I know people will say, Jim, you're anti-Harper, you're anti-Christy Clark, you're anti-conservative, you're anti-BC Liberal. I'll tell you what, because I've been in the reporting business for 40 years, every newsroom I've worked in, I've been accused of being anti-somebody. But I'll tell you what, when you're the government, I question what you do, why you do it, who you do it to. It doesn't matter what political stripe you are. I'm going to try to find what you've been doing wrong, and I'm going to point it out.
Well, that's your job. And again, I hate to go back to days gone by, but that was the job that the media performed to a fairly well when I was in government. When you had people like Jack Webster and Pat Burns and Marjorie Nichols and Ellen Fotheringham and Alan Garr and on the list went, sitting there with bated breath, waiting every day for a mistake and then reporting it with glee, then you knew that your feet were being held firmly to the fire. Now, Jim, I didn't like it. Who in the hell would like it? But it made us better government, and it made the opposition better opposition. And this is what they're supposed to do. That's the whole purpose of having a media. Now they're not doing it at all. I mean, I take you through the Campbell government, the run-a-river thing, which was now a virtually bankrupt BC Hydro. They haven't said a peep. Vaughn Palmer, Mike Smith, none of them. Now, when the NDP were in, I suspect that they would have been on that like you wouldn't believe. But since the Liberals have got in, there's been a sea change. Now, I suspect, to be fair, it's difficult for both Vaughn Palmer and Mike Smith to be very critical when their jobs depend upon them writing and their kids going to school and all the rest of it. And I know how tough that must be. And I must say, so that people know that I'm admitting this, when I was doing your job, Jim, it was easy for me to be sort of outspoken because I could always go back and practice law. And these other guys can't. And I understand that and I sympathize with it. But the result for the listener, for the consumer, is they are not getting anything like a fair deal.
Taking a look at the wrap-up now for the election campaign, I've noticed Thomas Mulcair plans to spend time in Vancouver. How important is BC to this election?
Well, it's always difficult to tell, particularly if you live here and don't know what the hell's going on really in Ontario and Quebec, where it will be decided. And every election that I can remember in the past few anyway, it's been said, BC will decide the election, and in every one it hasn't done anything of the sort. However, there's reason to believe that it might be this way in this election because everybody knows that it is close. And in any close election, of course, a lump of seats like we have where they don't look like they're particularly favorable to the government at this point are very, very important. So I think BC will count.
Has any one of the three major candidates or leaders stood out? And maybe I should say for Elizabeth May as well.
Well, I think Elizabeth May is the outstanding one of the four, and as I said before, that's damning with very faint praise. She is an absolutely outstanding leader. I've got to know her a little bit over the campaign. I read her marvelous book, and everybody should read that. But she's not going to be the prime minister. I think the outstanding thing that's happened in this election campaign, and boy, was I ever wrong on this, I think Trudeau, in the first debate, established himself. He peed on trees. He made sure that he took Harper on eyeball to eyeball. Nobody thought he could do it. And he largely dispelled this notion that he was too young and too inexperienced. He didn't entirely do that. I mean, people are saying that right now, and there are articles and things like the Huffington Post and so on that. But by and large, I think that he has dispelled that, and he has made what I consider to be a remarkable comeback. When you consider that he is in favor of Bill C-51, he certainly hasn't got the attitude towards pipelines and LNG plants that most British Columbians would like. But nevertheless, he has pushed himself forward, and now is I think clearly the favorite to be prime minister next Monday. And to me, that's remarkable. I didn't think he could do it. I wrote that I didn't think he could do it. I thought that Mulcair could. Mulcair, in the meantime, has faded, but I think everybody in Canada ought to recognize that Mulcair has faded because he was straightforward and honest and didn't shilly-shally on the issue of niqabs and that sort of thing in the province of Quebec. And I think he deserves great credit for that. He showed huge political courage, and I hope that someday he gets a reward for that.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, I think we had a record for the advance poll in Canada. Over 3 million people lined up, many of them for hours to cast their ballot. And what I fear is, especially in BC, where we have shorter than usual voting hours than the rest of the country, that people are going to be stuck in long lineups, get frustrated, and walk away.
Well, I'm afraid of that, too. And there's been a lot of evidence that the polling booths have not been well run, and that there are a lot of obstacles put in the way of the voter, and you know, it's been very difficult to vote. I'm afraid of that too. I've got a little bit of a radical view on this, and I think that I turn to countries I like Great Britain, like New Zealand, which I know fairly well, and so on, where they really don't fuss that much about the individual vote. They are assuming that 99.9% of the people that are going to vote in an election are straightforward, honest citizens of the country, and they'll take a little identification, but they don't waste a lot of time with it. Now, I know people listening are saying, "Oh my God, we've got to be careful, all these people coming in." The fact of the matter is there really isn't a hell of a lot of evidence of voter fraud over the years in Canada. And I think Mr. Harper has made this, just like the niqab, into a false issue in order to worry people that somehow we're going to be swamped by aliens if we don't make it very difficult to vote. And I'm sad about that. To me, it's something that it is wrong. We should rethink that. The danger simply is not there based on any historical evidence.
I was going to say a certain percentage of Canadians, too, will be between jobs, between homes. Nobody, in fact, moves more from home to home than Canadians do in the entire world. We go to where the jobs are. So while you're in transit, you have no fixed address, you can't vote.
Well, that's right. And I think that's a very, very wrong thing. I want to give you give people a very quick example. As you know, I'm a dual citizen, and I'm pretty upset that I'm very upset that I'm a second-class citizen because of that. Having said that, I was down in New Zealand during one of their elections. I think it was back in the 60s or 70s, and no, a little later than that, in the 80s, I guess it was. And the friend with whom I was staying said, "Yeah, you've got a New Zealand passport." And I said, "Yeah, I have." We can vote. And I said, "But I don't know the issues." He said, "That doesn't matter. You can vote if you want." Just laughing. He didn't expect me to do it, and I wouldn't have done it. But there you are. They just believe that people are not going to go to the polls unless they're entitled to. And if there are some that do sneak through, it's not worth depriving a lot of other people of their right to vote because they can't do it conveniently under the laws the government passes. And that's, I think, what you're driving at, Jim. You've got a set-off here. For let's just say, supposing you do have 1% of the people that vote are crooks, well, I would suggest that a far higher percentage can't vote for all kinds of bureaucratic reasons in order to look after that other 1%. And I just don't believe it's worth the candle. Don't say Rafe Mair is in favor of false voting, because I'm not. I think that you should take reasonable precautions, but at the same time, you've got to make it convenient for Canadian citizens to cast their ballot, and Mr. Harper is doing everything he can to make it inconvenient.
Well, he did cut the budget for Elections Canada.
He's got the budget for everything that's important. This is something. Let me just go off on a tangent a little bit here. One thing I think Canadians forget is that democracy is worth some money. And when I'm talking about change, which I think most people want, to the way we vote, to the way Parliament is run, and so on and so forth. Now that's going to cost money. And people, as soon as we get started down the road of reform, people say, "Oh my God, going to spend $100,000 on that, $1 million on that, blah 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 blah." Is democracy a freedom system? Is that worth paying for, or do we just let it slip so that guys like Harper can slowly and surely push it into the great beyond, and it no longer matters? We have a system now, as I think most people know, where we elect a tyrant every 4 years. And more of that tyrant runs everything. No MP dare speak out against him in the House if he's a member of the governing side. Do we want to change that? Do we want our MPs to be able to speak up for us? Do we want them, in fact, if things get really bad, to stand up and tell the Prime Minister if he doesn't tune up, we're going to throw him out? If we want that to happen, then it's going to cost us a bit to get things changed. Now, if we don't want to happen, it doesn't cost a damn thing to leave things the way they are, and we'll just go on merrily electing people like Harper. So these are the choices I think Canadians have to think about. There are some things that are important enough that we just have to open our wallets, maybe just this one time, but we've got to open our wallets and make sure that we've got things right so that we live in a democracy where there is freedom, where there's a decent place like it used to be, or we leave it so that it's open to people like Harper to play with.
The only person I know who's in jail for election fraud is former Conservative MP Dion Del Mastro, who's serving 1 month, and after that he has to have 18 months of probation for cheating on election spending.
Yeah.
And he was the front man who raised money for the Prime Minister.
Well, this is, of course, the whole point. When you get down to who cheats in elections, it sure as hell isn't Mr. and Mrs. Smith living in Kamloops, British Columbia. It's the big guys who are trying to manipulate things for their leader and their party. And they're the ones that are, and by God, you never catch most of them, but they're the ones that really are cheating and manipulating the system. And nothing that Mr. Harper's done, or in fact any Prime Minister I know has done a single thing to get those people. So Harper goes after Mr. and Mrs. Smith in Kamloops and leaves the other guys alone. And I think we should understand that the ordinary people I stand up for all the time and have for years, the ordinary people are honest, decent people who obey the law. It's when you get up into the upper regions of politics that, the truth and so on is a very strange word.
What I find disturbing about the current federal government is that they make these grandiose announcements. We are going to put so many millions of dollars or even billions of dollars into this program. Then you find out through Freedom of Information they did not spend the money they said they would. And the latest revelation is from CBC News that found out that even though $41 million was pledged to fight crime in Canada this past year, only some $28 million of that money was not spent. And then businessmen in Surrey wonder why there are shootings on their streets every day.
Well, this of course is true, and it happens. I suppose it happens in the best of governments because during a term priorities change, during a year priorities change. But I think basically you're right. First of all, the money that is promised to do important things often isn't spent. But I think worse than that, the public are led to believe that it has been spent or is about to be spent, so they can relax and drop their guard. Don't worry if you live in Surrey, help is coming, when probably it isn't.
Well, the Conservative government ran ads for 3 years saying our action plan is working. The action plan ended about the same time those ads started.
Yeah, well, that's typical, and it's it's sad to say, but and this, I guess maybe this is just a little lecture for all of us. We all have to sit back and watch and read and think when we get ready to cast our vote. I mean, is this a reasonable promise that's being made? Do you believe it? What about the track record? Does the track record indicate that they will do this, or probably just make the promise get the votes, and forget about it. So I guess what I'm saying, Jim, is that there is a thoughtfulness that has to come from the electorate that hasn't in the past. Now, I think this election has sharpened the mind considerably. I think people are looking at all sorts of different things they didn't before. My sense of it, being still a political writer and sometime commentator, is people are really getting into things like reform and change and so on, and not worrying about a lot of the crap that's coming out. Say, wait a minute, this has got to change. We want it to change. If you don't promise to change, and if you don't do that change, then you're toast. And I'm a little cheered by that.
A reporter who's gone across the country talking to voters said he was talking to a conservative worker who said to him, you can only hurt so many people for so long before it comes back to bite you.
Well, I think that's very, very true. And quite apart from everything else, Harper's been there 10 years. That's a long time. In any event, even if you've been doing a good job, which God knows he certainly hasn't, not in the last few years. But I think that worker is absolutely right. And it's true in everything that we do, Jim, whether it's in our home life or our working or whatever it is. The time comes, if you get enough crap, you become pissed off. And I think this is what's happened to a lot of voters, and for every good reason. Voters, certainly in my constituency, understand that our conservative MP, a guy named John Weston, simply has not stood up in Parliament and said anything controversial vis-a-vis the government in the 8 years he's been there. Now, I don't want to blame poor John, because neither have any of his colleagues, not one of them. They don't dare do that, because if they do, their career can be over. Now, I think the public for a long, long time has overlooked that, but I think they're coming to believe it. I always laugh at people say, oh, Joe Smith would make a hell of a good MP. My question is, why? Why would it be any different than the fence post with hair that's already in there? And that's the whole problem. They're really, if you're looking for electing government members, there's really nothing to choose between any of them, no matter how good they may have been in their past lives, mayors of towns and businessmen, union leaders, and so on. Once they get into the government of Canada under the system we have, they sit down, shut up, and be good little boys and girls and do exactly what they're told. And I think that this year, people are now starting to really understand that. And if nothing else, Harper has done us a favor with that.
Well, somebody told me they went to an all-candidates meeting where the conservative MP who was in government was booed when he spoke. And I said, well, the Tories have found a solution to that. They just don't show up for all-candidates meetings now.
Well, that's kind of sad, too. Having been a candidate, I've got to tell you, in their defense, there is this to be said. Oftentimes you can reach a hell of a lot more people by not being there and being somewhere else, particularly since all candidates meetings tend to be attended by the same general group of people. Now, I'm not excusing not going to all candidates meetings. What I'm saying is that I think most constituencies would be better served if there were fewer of them, but larger ones, so that people are really compelled to go. I know that when I ran in Kamloops, there were several that I missed. I got hell. The papers told me I was bound to lose, etc. Didn't make a damn bit of difference, because I was out getting more voters than I could ever have got, sitting in that room talking to some reporters in front of 45 or 50 people that go to those things as a matter of personal entertainment. So I think there is that to be said. However, that does not excuse Tories from ducking the issues. I think what it does say, though, is the people that organize these things, and they have lofty principles in doing so, they think they're doing the best, will be better off to confine them to 2 or 3 at an election instead of all over the place.
Well, the Prime Minister refused to take place in the traditional television network debate.
Well, that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Now, again, I think that they tried to schedule too many of them. I think that 1 or 2 is plenty. It's enough for the United States of America's presidential election. I don't know why it isn't enough here. But we've now got so many of them that I think you run the risk that the people will tire of it. However, once you do a television debate and it's with leaders, if they don't show up, they've got a lot to answer for. And on the other hand, when you stop leaders like Elizabeth May from going, they've got a lot to answer for too. So I would like to see the television debate go back to maybe 2 or 3 and concentrate on that. But there we are.
Rafe,
what do I know?
Rafe, any predictions for Monday?
I think it's going to be a Liberal government. God, way out on a limb, Rafe. What the hell? Who cares? Nobody's going to kill you. I got a feeling the Liberals might even form a majority.
Well, when they said people want change and they find the NDP scary because of what their record has been on the past when it comes to business.
Well, I think there's that too. And I think also there is a mood that hits in some elections, not all, where all of a sudden something sort of catches fire. Now, if Trudeau is found doing something nasty between now and then, or all kinds of things like that happen, then I suppose there could be a change. But generally speaking, I think in a lot of elections, all of a sudden the tide changes, and I think that's happened here. And I am no great Trudeau fan. I certainly was no great fan of his father, but I think that he has done a remarkable job of campaigning and is now he's on a ride.
Well, just judging by Facebook, I see so many selfies taken with Justin Trudeau, and I don't see any with Harper or Mulcair.
Well, I don't know how much you trust the social media on these things. It's the only media that you've got going that you can read with some degree of confidence. And I agree with you. I read Facebook and Twitter, and my sense of it is that Trudeau has done very well. Now, those things are always capable of being stacked, of course, and having been in politics and seen the stacking, maybe even done a little myself, I know that happens. But by and large, I think it is a fair indicator, and it's the only real indicator we have.
Well, looking at how shallow North American society has become, if you look at the fan voting on all the reality shows, that comment about Trudeau's hair,
yeah.
Even my wife, who has a master's degree, says, but you have to admit, the guy is good looking.
Yeah, well, it's sad that that does prevail, and I've got a funny feeling, that one of these days a guy or a gal is going to come along that's as ugly as a fence post and do very, very well indeed. And because we're getting so tired of this glamour counts situation, I'm being facetious, I guess, but it is too bad that people look at a guy's hairdo or a lady's hairdo or whatever it is and somehow substitute that for brains. But it does happen. There's no question about that. Glamour counts. There's the picture in your living room. You want to see a nice, pretty face, and there you are.
I was going to say Abraham Lincoln would have a hard time winning in today's climate.
Oh, wouldn't he? He made the marvelous remark that God must love ugly people because he made so many of them. And you've got an absolutely perfect point here. Is arguably one of the greatest men of modern times, and in television, he probably couldn't get elected dog catcher, and he had enough trouble getting elected as it was. But that it's sad to say that we have somehow, sometimes substituted glamour for brains, but not all of us. I have a lot more faith in the general public than a lot of people do, Jim, and that may be because they elected me twice. If they could do that, obviously glamour wasn't the issue. So, but there is that element in it. So and so ought to have his haircut, or our beards can't. You can't have a beard and that sort of stuff. Well, I have a beard anyway.
I was going to say TSN made all of their sports commentators shave off their mustaches.
Well, maybe that's a good thing.
I was going to say, though, some of those guys look better with the mustache.
Well, you know what? That's true. I think we're getting on to sports, something else. And as a man with a beard, I wish these baseball players and hockey players and so on, instead of just getting a couple of days of growth, of either grow a bloody beard or shave. But there we are. That's my prejudice.
Yeah, I've never understood the Don Johnson look. You can blame Miami Vice for that in the 80s.
Well, I guess I remember back in the days when that kind of got you in bad news with girls, and that was always far more important to me than looking fashionable. But there we are. How the hell do we get onto beards on athletes?
Well, maybe somebody will win the election by a whisker.
Well, that could be. And that's very likely, actually.
Rafe, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Oh, Jim, it's always a pleasure, and let's see what happens on Monday. It'll be interesting.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.